Hi, today I have the great pleasure of being with Dr. Jem Moore. She is a lady that I met in Arkansas. She is one of the wisest, sharpest, most brilliant women I know, and I am so thrilled that she's going to be with us. Dr. Moore, would you like to tell them a little bit about you?
Well, I have had a very varied career. I started out as a dentist, and then I eventually became a psychologist. So I have had many different visits and I travel a lot, and I've been in lots of different domains with lots of different people, and I love curiosity. I'm always up for something new.
And today was a surprise because Dr. Moore has recently had a health issue, and I'm so delighted that despite everything, she managed to come join us because today's topic is on emotional health, not mental health, but emotional health, something that we all have to process. Like in these times, the reason that we're doing this call is because we're reaching out to people to help them in the transition from COVID to the new normal. And with all these changes, there's a lot of stress on people, and we talked about different stress management strategies, but today we want to get the opinion of an excellent psychologist on what exactly are the best ways to deal with our emotional stresses. For example, all this change and uncertainty that we're going through is resulted in as stresses in relationships, in how we deal with our own emotions, in our changing our habits, even little things like getting our hair and nails done. We were talking about hair and nails today, weren't we?
Yes, and it's been 2 months since my hair has been washed, and I've been wearing acrylic nails for 30 years, and they are completely gone as a result of my 2 months in rehab. And so, it depends on how people deal with change. If people are okay with change, they seem to do better when situations like this come up. Because one of the things I did when I was quarantined at the rehab facility was I knew all the CNAs and what their relationships were with their husbands and with their kids and stuff. And that kept me as an extrovert very happy, and they were happy too. So I didn't feel by myself, and I think there are things you can do if you know what you need to take care of those needs.
As you said, a lot of people are confined to home, and you were confined to rehab for a while, and so we're having to change our habits, but also the amount of social interaction we're having with people is very different in terms of sometimes we're with people all day when we didn't used to be, or we're with the same person. You were talking about how to structure the time with people.
Yes, one of the things I think with husbands and wives who have only spent maybe 20 minutes a day talking intimately, this is a real challenge, because one of the things that typically people hear is that women like to tell their emotions and have somebody validate it, like, I'm really so scared, and then have somebody respond with, yes, I understand this is a very scary time, because then they feel good. But typically, as we know, husbands like to fix things, and they're used to fixing problems and fixing situations. And so there can be cross communication at this point. And what each person has to realize is that they're respecting difference, because they have to identify what I need right now is for you to listen and not fix. Or the husband, if you want him to fix something, say, I need your feedback on this to see what you would think. So you have to be very specific, knowing what the other person wants, or you can get into some difficulty. And you may need to be separate in the house for a while and do your own thing, and then come back together. Because in
That's
the
so true. I went on a vacation one time for 5 days, and I just went with one of my friends. But even though she's a good friend, I was like, I need time apart after 3 days. I was like, I cannot be with the same person for like all the time. So definitely, there's a need to have some distance and some of your own time at times. We've dropped Dr. Moore, but we'll hopefully get her back very soon. Another one of our participants shared that she's been FaceTiming her friends and family a lot, Mary, and thank you for that. That has been very helpful, and in some ways, we've got closer to people that we didn't have time for before by doing FaceTiming or like WhatsApp or whatever video feature you want to on Zoom. So with relationships though, I found that sometimes people you thought you could rely on, you can't, and other people end up being more helpful than you realized. And so what do you think of this shifting dynamic in like how you relate with people? Because some people just haven't been there for other people during this time. How do you deal with that?
Well, you just have to let them go their own way, because some people need a lot more control than others. And I know I have a friend that needs to know way ahead of time what she's going to go and pick up at the grocery or go pick up medicine or that kind of thing. And you have to really adjust to see who that person is, to be very respectful of them as different from how you are. And I think one of the things that a lot of times we think about carrying things like, you really look good, or you've done something wonderful for me, and we think it, but we don't say it. And it is very, very important during this time to say it, because other people can't read your mind. And I know when I was staying with a friend for the 14-day quarantine, one of the things that she liked was MSNBC. I particularly like Hallmark. So we had to negotiate when she was going to see her favorite movies and shows, and I would negotiate when I would see it. So we developed some respect for each other because we were very different in what we like. And that was a way for us to keep a happy relationship.
So negotiating, any tips on how to negotiate?
Well, say, here's what I want. How does that fit for you? And what is it that you want? People have to be clear. They don't just say, oh, anything you want to do is fine, or anything I want to do is fine. That is not helpful. You need to be very specific and say what it is. And then say, I really would like to watch this show and that show. And that other show seems to be at the same time frame. Could you watch your show tomorrow night and I'll watch this one tonight? So that both people feel like they're heard and related to.
Mm-hmm. That's a great practice. With a lot of people, there's this tension around because of the news and because of uncertainty over finances. What should people do with that niggling feeling of uncertainty and fear? I know, like, for example, one of our the business coach JT Fox likes to say work ethic eliminates fear. So that's a great strategy for many people. But what are your recommendations on dealing with fear?
Well, one of the things is that I know that I have to learn to nurture myself and say, this is going to be over one of these days. Things are going to get better. And if you have somebody in your life who is what I call a fear monger, who said, oh, it's terrible, this is going down the tubes, we'll never be the same, that you can keep your own counsel and walk away from them and say, that's not true, that's not my experience. And say this internally to yourself, because self-nurturing is very, very important at this time. And a lot of people have not worked on their own self-nurturing. How to be your own best friend is very crucial during this time, because other people may be terrorized, like they think they're going to get COVID-19 if they walk into a store, and you just say, well, then don't go into the store. It's okay. You don't have to do it today. And so you are very tolerant and understanding of their fear, so that their fear can be reduced and not exaggerated.
That's great. It helps to acknowledge people's fear rather than just ignore it. And in yourself too. What are ways to nurture yourself, to listen to yourself? I've heard journaling is good. What kind of things do you recommend?
Well, as I said, if you would think about what your own best friend would say to you in a situation, you just say, this is terrible. You'll never get out of here. When I was locked down in the rehab facility, I heard people say things like, oh, well, I don't know how many months we'll be in here. It's going to be terrible. And I thought, no, that's not true. When the health department gets more information, they're going to relate to us. And so what you do is you have to have that reasonable person in your head that says, you know, this is going to be better. If you were thinking about a loving, kind person who had a reasonable stance, that's who you want to be your mother at that point inside your head. And so it takes years of work sometimes to get that mother grown up. I have worked myself on months and months and months. And when you get into a crisis, it is particularly helpful to have that already in place, because it's like if you're going to run a mile for a 28-mile marathon, that's not going to help much. So you need to run the 28-mile marathon before the race. So to be prepared for it. And so we're preparing for the future when we learn to nurture ourselves moment by moment in the now.
So there's a lot of self-talk that you have to be aware of what you're thinking, what you're saying to yourself, and sort of catch yourself when you're going the wrong direction, basically.
Yes, and what you do is you realize when you go through this a lot of times about what a negative world we live in. When you think about, for kids, doing a spelling bee, the teacher will say how many you got wrong rather than how many you got right. So we start off on a negative foot a lot of times in our culture. And so we have to reverse that by consciously being aware that there is negativity there, and we replace it with positivity.
So
It takes a lot of work.
Yeah, what do you do when you just don't know, like with finances? There's a lot of uncertainty right now, whether people are going to have their jobs, how the money's going to come from the government, if it's going to come, how the landscape of the next few months is going to shape out, whether there's going to be a depression. How do you deal with that?
Well, you have to partialize it. I know this because I'm dealing with it myself. I am not able to practice right now because there's a shutdown of part of my scheduling, and they are closed, so I can't work. And so I have to say, I'm going to do this week. I'm going to do that next week. I don't say what's going to be happening in October, because I don't know what's going to be happening in October. I can only know partial. How am I going to pay for my current food? How am I going to call up and talk to the people about postponing my payment for my mortgage, postponing my payment for my car? I do all the things that will help me to feel more secure. And I have done these things, so I'm not talking out of turn. And I found that a lot of these companies are very helpful in talking to you about putting things out 3 months and then reevaluating at that point. So you just don't go ballistic and say, oh, it's never going to happen. You know, I'm going to go down the tubes. I'm going to lose my house. I'm going to lose my car. You don't do that. You just say, okay, what can I do today that will help me for tomorrow?
That's a great point. Just to have perspective, to just narrow it down to what you can control versus what you can't control, and just hone in that. I do have a thing that I use as a surgeon. Life can be pretty stressful. You're supposed to get everything right the first time, every time, and the hours can be crazy. And I have a lot of respect for surgeons, having lived through that path. And something I developed, which may be helpful to other people, is what I call the A to E. And A stands for acknowledge. We acknowledge that there's something that's bothering us, that there's a problem. B is be with it. And oftentimes it's not the right time to be with it any old time. You have to carve out a place or a time that you can be with it. For example, Dale Carnegie used to talk about when you're grieving, you need to fill in most of your day, but then carve out an hour or two when you can actually be with those emotions. And then C goes for consider. So once you've allowed yourself to feel the emotions, then you're clearer headed, so you can consider what your options are. And as Dr. Moore just said, you can consider, okay, what can I do now? What are the choices here? What was valid out of what somebody said, or what was not true? So you consider all of what's going on in a rational way. And then D stands for decide. Like, is there a lesson here? Is there something I want to do? Where do I want to go with this? And then E is end it. End it with gratitude, end it with reaching out for help if you need help, but don't just let it go on and on. Just end it. And then sometimes with something like grieving or something like processing financial worries or other things, you may have to go through the cycle more than once, but it is a helpful way, I found, of dealing with things. What do you think, Dr. Moore?
I think that's great, because if you can't acknowledge it, you can't solve it. And a lot of people want to bury their heads in the sand. And if they do that, then the situation only grows worse. So if you acknowledge it, at least you can come up with options to solve the problem. And that is very helpful. And one of the things that a lot of times is that people who have been through lots of tribulation are more calm during situations like this. And one of the things that was so interesting to me, in our culture, we're fast, and we don't develop a lot of patience. And there's a biblical statement where it says, tribulation worketh patience. And I always kind of chuckle to myself when somebody is praying for patience, because I know they're going to get more tribulation in order to help them solve the situation. Because that is usually the calmest person, because they've been through all kinds of stuff and they know there's a way out. You just have to be calm and sit down and work it one piece at a time.
Yep. That's really true. Whenever there's a resuscitation situation or things are going really badly, it is then super important to be the calm person, the person who's having clear direction. This is what we do from here to here to here. So that, from a clinical scenario, that's totally true as well. I wanted to ask you about, some people are having difficulty with comfort. They're wanting to eat comfort foods, turn to alcohol. They're tempted to go back on drugs if they were off drugs, those kind of things. So what advice can you give people who are trying to get through this by using comfort measures?
Well, one of the things that you have to understand what comfort is, because positivity is not gaining 40 pounds. Positivity is saying, okay, I'm going to have a structure to my day. If I'm here by myself or I'm here with one of my family members, let's have a structure. Let's have breakfast, let's have lunch, let's have dinner. And then we structure other activities during the day. I'm an expert at this because I like flexibility. And so I have, in situations where there's been no structure, I make structure. And that is very, very helpful, because if you just sit and let yourself go with no structure, you'll be eating different potato chips and this and that and be back at the refrigerator all day. That is, we call it comfort food, but actually we're going awry. We're not dealing with the positive part of it, is that we want to keep ourselves healthy. If that means we walk out to the front door and take a little excursion, if we're restless, then we don't eat. We are exercising if we can. So we have to structure our day. Like, we get up, and for a woman, put on her makeup, brush her hair, this kind of thing. Even though I'm not going anyplace, I'm getting ready for the day. So structure is very important in that way to keep us sane.
It's funny, we were talking about that with Joseph from Musa Salon yesterday, Musa Hair Salon, and he was saying like, yeah, you have to wear you have to look good every day. It helps keep you sane and happy. And so there are other things to turn to besides comfort foods and alcohol. You got to try and find healthier things that will still make you happy, but not be causing you harm. I had a question about the elderly. There's a lot of isolation for the elderly right now. They're separate from a lot of people because people are trying to protect them, or they feel unsafe going out. Do you have any words of advice there?
Well, I think that you have to do the same thing. Would be considered elderly, and I am in my own home by myself. And so one of the things that I do for myself is I connect with friends. Like you had talked about FaceTime, I call my friends call me. Sometimes I ask people to pick up some kind of groceries for me, which means they're going to come to the door. They may not come in, but I will see them so that we have some contact. So if I'm a person that likes contact, then I generate contact and I ask for what I need. And that really helps me with the structure of my day. Or I say, come by and would you take my trash out? I have next door neighbors that will do that kind of thing for me. And if we have been able to ask for what we need, we're going to get what we need most likely. Maybe not from the same person, but from different persons who will actually, and I think one of the things is that life has slowed down so much that people are more giving and more caring in my experience. And they will ask, do you need anything from the grocery store? Do you need anything from the drugstore? And I think I have found that our rate has slowed down so much that people are more loving, and that is a real plus.
Yeah, it's kind of strange that at times like this, when we're outside our usual rat race, that we reassess what matters to us in life and we reconnect with the people that matter to us. Any advice on looking at your, some people call it purpose in life, some people call it like a reason to live. Any advice on how to look at that now that we have some opportunity, because we're out of the norm, we're in this situation of uncertainty? Any advice on how to look at what really matters to you?
Well, I think that one of the things that I have done is I write down what is important to me and what I want to get done in my life, because I know that this is not going to be the same way forever. And I have other things I want to accomplish. And so I'm making a little list of different things that are going to be important to me to take forward. And I remember seeing today on television a woman who is 90 years old and having a birthday, and how people came and gave her a birthday gift and stood outside her house and honored her. And I think that we can all do this for each other, because we are available to each other and we're in this together. So act like we're together.
Yeah, the bucket list includes other people and what you can do for other people, as well as what you would like done in your own life. Like, and at some point, travel will open up too. So, I mean, it could include visits to places, but there's a lot in your local community too that you can explore. I started this practice called Glad Giving, which is part of Profit First, and it talks about giving a certain amount of your income, in just 1%, to whoever you want to. And I was like, okay, what charities are around here? And just to explore what's even going on around you. I ended up giving it to a charity that helps entrepreneurs from underdeprived areas, which is locally, I think, Planet Startup, I think it's called. But there is so much to explore locally too. And thank God we have the internet. Like, what advice do you give for local community involvement?
Well, I think anything that attracts your attention is where you need to go. What gives to you, you give to it. And it doesn't have to be the same thing that anybody else does, but if it, so to speak, tweaks your beak, that's where you need to put your money, your time, your energy, because then you will feel rewarded and the other people will feel as well.
Right. I'm running out of things to ask you. You've told us so many great things, but we still have 5 minutes left. So if anybody has questions, please feel free to ask. Any other advice that you think would be helpful for people to deal with the emotional challenges these days?
Well, one of the things that I realized is that whatever is exaggerated during this time, say for instance, if you're having some kind of problems interpersonally with your mate, this is going to be exaggerated now. And so just don't let it take hold to the point that you want a divorce. I saw that the divorce rate is up now. And so disengage from each other before you blow up is what I would say, and go to your separate corners, and then plan on getting some help from somebody, because now you identified some of the problem areas, and as you identify the problem areas, you will be able to deal with them better. In fact, you may deal with them enough that you feel pretty satisfied by the time you get to a therapist, and you can then just finish up and do whatever you need to do to make your life better.
Are there any particular self-help modalities that you would recommend for people to help deal with their own stuff or with relationships? Hopefully we haven't lost you. I think,
Well,
yeah, we can still
one,
hear you.
one of the things is that you have to realize what's your problem and what's the other person's problem. And that's sometimes difficult because, you know, we are very easy to blame somebody else for something that may have been something that we have initiated. So being able to step back and think about it after you blow up, and go and think about how much of this is my problem, how much of this is the other person's problem, and then acknowledge it to the other person. That goes a long ways toward healing very old sores, like saying, you know, I realize that I said this, that you're a terrible person, but I realize that, you know, I initiated some of this, and I think that you were just very hurt there, and I said the wrong thing. That goes a long way toward connecting with the other person and having them feel like you care about them as well as yourself.
What do you do when people, what do you do when people are not interested in communicating?
Well, you can't communicate with somebody that doesn't want to communicate with. And I'll say, I see that you don't want to communicate now. If you want to change your mind at some later date, I'm available. But I'm going to go to the other room and sit down and think about this. You
And,
can't make somebody communicate.
and do you have any good strategies of letting go, for switching off? I know some people switch off by watching TV, or some people use music. Any good ways to switch off that mind that's going all the time, or the upset?
Well, one of the things is, you know, if you have any meditative music or something that is soothing for you, that kind of helps you before you get ready to go to bed, to listen to the music. Or if you have an animal that you like to pet or to be with, you can calm yourself and your nerves by doing some of that, rather than being very active during that time. Because you might even, for people that can't stay calm, they might even do a little bit of dancing, put on a record or something, because that takes energy to exacerbate, you know, that energy, and then you'll be calm and more rested to sleep.
Mm-hmm. So I guess we're almost out of time, and this has been really helpful. Thank you. This will be released to everybody, and Dr. Moore is in Arkansas, but she's available by phone, and we'll give you her contact information, and hopefully she will join us for sharing her wisdom in future. She's an amazing resource, and one of the people I most admire and respect in the world.
Thank you so much. This has been a pleasure to be with you, and I'm very happy to have done this.
Thank you. All right, thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.